land far away did raid them in the early hours of the morning, and we'll take a look here and just see how this base withstood the raid. And you'll notice that there's the high exterior stone walls there are missing. They've rocketed through those walls, and then they're now inside the base, and they're slowly chipping away through the different honeycomb layers with hand tools and taking their time to sort of go through that base. These are the guys who raided them. They're the Plan Clan, I think, as they're referred to. I believe they're from Korea, and they're welcome on Rustopia. We're glad to see them here. Because of time zones, they do tend to play when the population is sometimes a bit lower, so lots of sort of pickaxe raiding and that type of stuff. But I was interested to study their build and to see if there are any differences in the way that they build versus an American build. And there was a topic that was on Facepunch forums a while back about cultural differences in builds and if that affected building styles. And I don't really see any differences here. Don't seem quite as paranoid as the Americans with the crazy honeycombed bases, but effective builds, I think. Yes, they can be raided. Pretty much anything can be raided, but they have many areas to defend against. Gives them that 360 degree. Taking a look at some visitors from South Korea who have been playing on Rustopia during the past few wipe cycles. It's been great having them on the server, and it's been really interesting studying their base designs. I've been interested to see if there's any difference between a base design from people from a different culture than most of the European base designs, I guess you could say, that we're seeing on most of the Rust Crib series. So I don't really notice any difference necessarily. They do seem to have more of an aesthetic touch to building the base, and it's a little more uniform looking than some of the American bases. A little bit less honeycomb going on, but still a very effective base. They manage their building privilege wisely. They're a very effective group. The only issue that seems to be posed with people from different time zones playing is there's a disproportionate amount of people sometimes on the server when it's their peak time versus the server peak time. So that has some added difficulties to it, but it's been a lot of fun having them on the server. If anyone can decipher any of the signs that are here, please let me know. I don't know what they say, but I'd be interested in hearing any feedback on that in terms of shifting the balance between base defenders or raiders. But as you can see here, bases start off small. The Plan Clan has a small base here, but they eventually evolve into something like this with higher groups on vanilla Rust servers. The larger groups will farm at a very intense rate, and they have it down to a science in terms of how they place their towers, their main structures, and they know how they're going to be building their compound before they even set out to do it. They do have to adapt to the landscape because they don't always know what the map's going to look like prior to the seed being developed. But once they pick a spot, they farm feverishly, and the type of bases that are coming out that we're seeing on high population Rust servers now, even with a 1 week wipe cycle. Keep that in mind, guys, while you're watching all this footage. These are 1 week wipe cycle bases. But the type of bases we're seeing coming out are ones that are very resource intensive to raid, and that's something that you always have to balance because you want bases that are going to be vulnerable, and bases that get to be this big with this amount of resources, even on a 1 week wipe cycle, you almost can't farm enough resources unless you ally with a lot of other groups to be able to raid that type of compound. And it's really no fun if you're not feeling vulnerable in Rust, or if you get to a point where your base is impenetrable. Not that these bases are bases that can't be raided, but they weren't raided, and typically on Rustopia we see that type of activity going down. So I think it was just a case where the people who would want to raid the base didn't have the amount of resources and figured to expend the amount of rockets they had, they would only breach part of the courtyard, which would have made it very frustrating. As you can see here, some of the members had extra resources and put into design some sculptures with their names, with their clan tags. That's something that people will often do with their base designs, whether it's signs or structures that they build. That is, they'll build shrines, monuments to themselves, to other people, to events on the server. And that's part of kind of the lore and the history that develops on Rust servers, and that's unique to each and every server. Taking a look inside here, you'll see that they have various signs here. I'm not sure what they say. If anyone can decipher the Korean language, let us know if these signs say anything bad, and we'll go ahead and make sure we're aware of what's going on there. As we go ahead and move on over, we're going to take a look at CML's compound throughout the last couple wipe cycles, and to get that look at it. Moving on over, we're taking a look at our friends from Korea, the UR clan. They have a base design that's really unique unto itself. I haven't seen anything like it. It had some very interesting concepts to it in terms of how you access the main base, and it has a very distinct aesthetic to it. The base itself was built in an isolated area, so they use the geography, the topography of the map to the best of their ability, and that's something, guys, that we don't often think about in Rust, but it's really important to build your bases in parts of the map that you have a very, inherent advantage, if you will, because to take the map for granted is something that can really give you problems. Parts of the building here that were still twig on that forward operating base. Now, you get some tower is absolutely crazy in its scope. A rocket has been fired from the tower down thing, and you always want to find the most direct way into a loot room, the most direct way in, the most direct way out, and usually that's blowing into the center of the base and figuring out from there. As you can see, they made their way into a loot room on the first floor here, which is probably just some type of materials room. You can see a lot of furnaces have already started to get to work. You'll notice one of the high exterior stone walls missing, and they've burrowed their way into Fatty Patty's base. So they're making progress in here, and they're moving forward with rockets. Primarily, rockets over C4 are used when raiding bases, and they're going straight into the core of the base to figure out then where they need to go. They're going to need to go up to access many of the loot rooms. But take note here, what they're really looking for are those building cabinets. Once you gain access to that, you have some privilege. Even if it's not the main cabinet, you will gain some privilege. And notice that they also walled it off, so this is a way for them to take over the base piece by piece. It could be considered griefing, but in my mind, it's just a strategy of taking over the base. Their forward operating base or raid base has now come under attack by another group that's moving in. So they've attracted some attention. Even though it's early morning on Rustopia, they've attracted the attention of the Toxic clan. Notice as Toxic moves in, they're throwing down those high exterior stone walls which shield them from the fire coming back their way from that raid base. We got some good gunfire going here, and both sides seem to be fairly evenly matched. The Raiders had some numbers, but it looks like Toxic is bringing some numbers to the fight as well. I really like how as Toxic moves in, they are very aggressive. They're not holding back, and one of their members here is doing sort of an MVP play. Look at him running in the water there as a rocket hits that raid base, and he's making his way into that base that was being raided by the UR clan, which is the clan that has the forward operating base here. We get some rockets being fired here, and these are the incendiary rockets, or the fire rockets as they're sometimes referred to. These are primarily used to suppress or direct players in a particular direction. They're not the most damaging rockets, they're not primarily used for raiding bases, but they will keep players from going into the fire because the fire does damage them greatly. But notice they missed the high exterior stone wall a little bit there, so it sort of missed its mark. It wasn't quite as effective. Inside the base, there are 3 UR members who are holding strong in there. They're not moving from that location, so even though their forward operating base and their buddies are under attack, they are going to hold back in that base and hopefully be able to surprise the Raiders when they come in. So notice here that Toxic, again, that speed and aggression, they took right to that forward operating base and raided it. They've broken through the barrier of the forward operating base. There's a high exterior stone wall and 2 doorways there, so it was airlocked. They've opened that up, and what the defenders UR really need to do here is throw down a door, but it looks as though they were trying to just do a stopgap measure and put down a concrete barrier, but that's quickly able to be dispatched by the Toxic members. Now, I love this scene here. Toxic rushes in, and this is one extended scene here without any cuts, just slaughtering the UR members who are in here and just taking this forward operating base over. This, guys, out of all the raid cams I've done, is the quickest I've ever seen a group move on a forward operating base. Toxic came in, they were focused, and they went for it, and they achieved exactly what they intended to achieve. Beautiful play by Toxic. So back inside again, we have some UR members in here. There's 3 of them. They have rocket launchers, AKs. One member has a shotgun for that CQB battle that's going to go on in there. And Toxic has overtaken the raid base. They're spending some time to take out the spawn points in here, to look through the crates, and to secure this base as their own. They need to make sure they don't leave any respawn points in there because they don't want somebody to gain access to the cabinet and screw up despawn loot or screw with them in any way. They have been trailed this entire time by a lone sniper here from the E4V clan. They've been giving Toxic some trouble this wipe, and it looks like they're hot on their tail here. There's only 1 member so far, but even 1 sniper in a tower is very problematic and difficult to deal with. You can notice here that the shots are just missing that sniper, as one of the Toxic members is now making their way into the base that was being raided. He has no idea, though, that there are UR members up top waiting for his approach. UR is anticipating a much greater approach than one player because their forward operating base was just taken over, and presumably they're communicating with their members. But notice as that one Toxic member moves in here, they are sending a lot of rockets down there. So they blew a big portion of their rockets on one player, which is really no way they could have known there was only one player. So they probably thought it was something more like 5-6 players coming their way. So those rockets no doubt attracted the attention of Toxic, and they're now moving in force, in formation, again with that speed and aggression right into that base that was being raided by UR. UR has an advantage here in that they have a choke point, a bottleneck to deal with here, which is this one pathway that's been opened up, which is really the only way for Toxic to get in unless they want to blow another way into the base. So at this point, this fight, even though it's disproportionate with the numbers because there's only 3 UR members left, you'll notice the Toxic members are going down very quickly. That's not anything to do with skill, it's just simply the design of the base and the dynamics of this situation. UR is doing a beautiful job here of using that choke point to their advantage, and even though they use a lot of rockets on one player, they appear to have a lot more to spare. So instead of progressing forward and burrowing further into the base, they've decided to stand their ground and fight Toxic. Now Toxic, even though they've taken over that raid base, they haven't put down many sleeping bags in there because they were anticipating that they most likely had all of the members in that forward operating base neutralized. But as we can see, that wasn't the case, and there were 3 more in that main base that was being raided. It's now night. 1 Toxic member survived the rocket barrage and firefight in there, and he's down on the first floor trying to figure out exactly what to do next. He needs to get some of his teammates in there in order to smoke out the remaining UR members who are up there, and it's going to be a bit tricky to do, especially under the cover of night. If you guys are wondering why a player is running with a torch, it's a universal symbol of a teammate saying don't shoot, so sometimes players will hesitate, and it looks like that player was taken out. He may have been a UR member. I didn't catch the name tag, but it looks like he was shot by a Toxic member, so that may have been a UR member trying to come back and join his buddies. But notice again as Toxic tries to approach that they are taken out one by one very methodically because of that pathway. But one member was able to get by, his buddy was able to help boost him up, and he's now up onto the second floor here, so he's engaging with the UR members who were there on the second floor. So through some strategizing and some planning, they were able to get a member over there and work in teamwork, and Toxic was able to get at least 1 player up to that point now. But they're still having quite a difficult time here. 1 UR member's down, there's 2 left up top as Toxic is trying to hold down the first floor. Again, get some intense CQB, close quarter. The only way to stop that from happening, and it's really a timing issue, so you have to really have that rhythm going. But it can be done, and that's having there. In these raid bases, they typically have lots of high-end supplies, including rockets, C4, large stacks of ammunition, so they might have to think about cutting the engine about that. But the importance here of this raid tower that needs to be neutralized is that notice that now Plant has a height advantage that is on par with the main base, which is problematic for DMG. You can see that straight through the shorting ports here, the embrasures, they can see right into points of